Here today to talk about two things. One is building ONOS on Windows, and the other is talking about improvements to the AAA application. So thanks for joining us, Viswa, and you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jono. So today I'm just going to share my views about Windows support in ONOS and also the AAA use case where we could have inside ONOS. So first, let me just go through ONOS in Windows because that is pretty much a simple, straightforward one. So I think we could wrap it up immediately. So the motivation is that, as you know, ONOS is a Karaf-based distribution. So technically, it should run on any Java-compatible OS. So why not Windows? So I think there is no technical challenge in running ONOS in Windows, but again, we don't have admin and deploy scripts to actually make ONOS up and running. So if you think about the use case that we could unearth if we bring in this support is primarily lower-end systems such as Windows host. So assume that if you are an app developer, you just need a running version of Windows, so you are actually forced to have Ubuntu on top of Ubuntu. You need to install ONOS, so that is one of the use cases. And second one is actually if we can just have ONOS run natively in Windows, it's pretty much neat and very convenient for native Windows developers. So if you look at the scripts that we have currently, so we have onos.sh, which actually opens an Apache Karaf client, and then we have other admin scripts such as ONOS SSH, ONOS form cluster, service.sh, and init.d. So it is pretty much basically trying to use the utility scripts that are available inside Karaf framework. So nothing more, nothing less. And if we have, if we see the Karaf bundle, it already has support for Windows OS itself. But again, we are not just using it. So if we could have a wrapper over those Karaf bash scripts, then we could very well have ONOS up and running in Windows as well. And just to give an analogy, what we can do is, for example, if we take ONOS SSH.sh, it will be using native SSH client that is available in basic Linux. So for this use case, we could pretty much package putty.exe, which is a very lightweight application. And similarly, if you see ONOS form cluster, it will be using the curl command. So even curl is available as an exe, so we could use that. If you see the last one, that is init.d. So here again we have to use some specialized packages, something like always up or run a service package to actually have ONOS run as a Windows service as soon as Windows boots up. So just by adding these 4 simple scripts, we could have entire Windows support for ONOS. Like we are just having an additional OS support just by introducing some new scripts. We are not doing anything out of the box here. I mean, so we have those 4 scripts, but again, just to add some more pepper in the use case, we could also have an installer-based approach for Windows deployment. So some of the use cases that we would unearth is basically we could have install, uninstall, upgrade in a more streamlined fashion. We could use standard directories like program files, ONF, etc. to monitor and to diagnose purpose. And also we could interact with dependencies whether this particular system is capable of installing ONOS rather than having the user download the ONOS and then after unpacking it and then while starting ONOS, if it is detecting it, instead we could interact with dependencies even before the installation. Also, we could have the error reporting system, like whenever some crash happens or exception happens, we could easily navigate to our links, to our wikis and mailing list for support. But this work doesn't come free. So like you understand, right? So the installer stuff is something, but the last step in the build. So we should build something, and then during packaging part, we will be having installer. So currently, ONOS build system doesn't support Windows yet because bug doesn't support Windows. So pretty much we can have, if at all you think to have the installer framework, we should be having this step manually done. Like after building the of distribution package, we need to just run the installer script to actually build the installer MSI file. So some of the tech considerations here is we could either go with Windows bash script, or we could also opt PowerShell. But one difficulty in PowerShell is that it would need explicit permission to run PS1 scripts, and also there is much difference between different versions of PowerShell. So we cannot really be sure that whatever script that we are giving will run by default in all Windows-based systems. So it's better to go with bash scripts. And as far as installer is concerned, we could very well use the nullsoft installable nullsoft scriptable install system. It's also open source. Like you don't have to really use the install shield or Macrovision's install shield. Yeah, so that's pretty much I have on the Windows use case. So if we don't have any questions, we can move on to the AAA use case.
I have a couple of questions. So this is Brian from ON.Lab.
Yes, Brian.
So I guess a couple of things. One is that we do use Carafe, as you mentioned, but our code that runs on Carafe also depends on Unix-style paths. So, for example, the distributed systems code, it uses relative paths from the Carafe, or within the Carafe directory, to locate the log files for the state machines. We've also got the application subsystem will look for pre-installed applications in a specific relative path. So we would also need, as part of this work, to go through the ONOS tree, look at places where we interact with the file system, and make sure that we're doing so in a platform-agnostic way. So that's one concern. Another concern is that you mentioned about 5 of the scripts that are Unix-like, either on Mac or Linux. But it turns out that in the tools directory, we've got probably closer to like 100 scripts that do various things. And so trying to maintain 2 of those types of scripts is probably going to be something that's a bit tedious, especially, a lot of times these build scripts get updated frequently. And then I guess the last concern that you mentioned about no buck support, it turns out there is experimental support for Windows on buck now, but some of our rules do rely on having a Unix-like shell, and so we need to just write equivalents of those rules for Windows, basically. So I think the scope, from my perspective, is actually a little bit bigger than what you've suggested here. It's not impossible. It just would require a lot of work. I guess from my perspective, what I would rather see is a lot of these scripts being refactored and potentially rewritten in a language like Python, which would also be cross-platform and maybe a little bit more palatable than either Windows Shell or Bash. And if we were to go that route, then you'd potentially have fewer end-user touch points, and you'd maybe require only 3 or 4 or 5 scripts, which, from my perspective, would be manageable.
Right. Yeah. So Brian, just a couple of questions to you. So you said that there is also another suite of scripts available in the tool. So is it under dev tools or even with the distribution?
Well, so within the distribution, there's a few scripts. The ONOS service script. I can't remember the whole list off the top of my head. But within the development environment, there's also the 100 or so tools is probably within the development environment. If you look under the tools directory, there's some scripts that are available for doing the build, scripts for doing development, scripts for doing the assembly of the ONOS package, scripts for doing testing. The stuff that gets built into the ONOS package would be things like the ONOS client, ONOS service command, SSH, the generation of user keys, stuff like that.
Yeah, so my scope was primarily to run ONOS in Windows, so I completely understand that it would take pretty much big approach to actually move their development environment to Windows. So currently my scope was that I already have a Karaf distribution, so why not just let me just run in Windows?
So what I'm trying to say is that if you just run it in Windows, the cluster is not even going to form, because the path to the logs that we use for building the path to the cluster definition file is a Unix-like path, and the path for the state machine log for our distributed system stuff is also a relative path, and all of the apps, some of which are required for startup, are also going to be at a relative path. So we need to make sure that the file system accesses that are happening within the ONOS components are platform agnostic.
Right, yeah, got it.
So this is Ray from ON.Lab. Is your plan to have a Windows service to run the Java code?
What's the question to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is the entire plan. Was this Thomas?
This is Ray.
Right, okay. So the idea was to just give the, the compatibility that is available with respect to the Karaf distribution. So if you take Karaf distribution today, we could run ONOS either as a service or as a standalone program, right? So the idea is to have this both enabled even in Windows ecosystem.
Okay, the reason I raised this question is that within the lab we have no Windows resources, and we have no licenses or plans to get any licenses for Microsoft software, which means anything in C or C# we cannot deal with. So if what we're dealing with is standard out-of-the-box Karaf stuff, great, just install it, it should go. If we need to make any modifications to that C code, then we have troubles.
Okay, got it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you considered, instead of trying to run on Windows natively, if you try and run in an environment such as Cygwin, that may be able to kind of smooth over some of the file path issues that Brian mentioned, and it may be possible to use large parts of the scripts that we already have in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't tried that yet.
And the other thing is, in Windows 10 there is native support for the Linux applications, right? So that may be another way to kind of smooth the migration path.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. Does anyone else have any questions on this? So shall we move on to the AAA part then?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the next topic is AAA in ONOS. Yeah, so today we have a AAA app that does EAP TLS authentication, but that is more tied to the code use case. So there is no generalized AAA ecosystem within ONOS. So for example, I want to install a flow, or I want to provide a DHCP IP only if the host is authenticated. If that's my use case, then that is not happening right now. So the idea is to provide that approach both in short term as well as long term. So this is the traditional EAP flow. I guess most of you would be aware, and this is what's happening currently. So we have a host, switch, and ONOS, and then we have an external radius server. So based on the packet-in input, ONOS is actually proxying this packet-in information and forms a radius request and then get it authenticated. So that much doesn't do anything other than just proxying the response back from the radius server to the original switch. This option is to have a local auth store to maintain the authentication information, so that other apps can actually poke into the store to understand the status of authentication and do their stuff. So what kind of use case we could have based on this authentication store? So some of the things that I had in my mind was we could have some special processing based on VLAN ID plus MAC address, and then we could have GUI or REST API exposed on top of local store for external application to make sense. For example, if some app wants to be notified whenever user is authenticated, whenever host is authenticated, we could do that. And then we could do timeout based authentication, one-time authentication, partial reauth for the optical case. We could even link it with the DHCP app to actually maintain the least IP plus MAC address map. And we could also have this clustered so that if a host is getting authenticated in node 4, would then be able to have the flows install on node 1. So this is primarily on having the local auth store maintained. And other one is, which already Jono suggested, is basically have an event-based approach. So I don't care whether what information I got from the authentication response. If all I need was to just know whether user is authenticated or not, just by using event, I'll be able to do it. So this mode doesn't have persistence; it just have notifications. I would leave. I mean, I would anyway sending the slides for a review, so I'm just moving on. So if you see the difference between option 1 and option 2, we could have much more use cases on option 1 just because we have the data with us. But again, option 2 would be useful if you just need to have a one-time authentication or use cases like that. And we could very well club both option 1 and option 2 to have much more interactive flow. So these are the short-term goals. Like if at all we agree to have this AAA use case, the first thing to do is to extend the existing AAA app to actually store the authentication information in a separate store. So it could be a native internal store inside ONOS, or it could be a car of service. We could have any number of implementation, and then we could selectively choose the app with which you want to introduce this AAA use case. For example, we could introduce this feature first in the forwarding application or the DHCP application to actually let others know that we have a AAA system inside, and then probably all the other app developers might embrace it. On the long-term goal, the idea is to just copy what we have in the ONOS subsystem today. So if you take our device subsystem, we have protocol providers, we have protocol consumers, and then we have a store backing that particular device. So similarly, we should be having auth provider and auth consumer. So auth provider can be, I mean, if you take the AAA app, today it's just only radius authentication. So tomorrow we may be in a position to support diameter or OAuth or any different kinds of authentication. So by following the native implementation what ONOS has already got, like this provider consumer backing store approach, we could easily integrate other different kinds of authentication, and much more, like we could also interface with external accounting systems like SQL Server or other basis systems which actually does the reporting and accounting logic. It's basically that we are actually introducing the whole AAA use case within ONOS so that it serves for much larger use case. Yeah, I mean, that's all I had for the AAA use case. So if we don't have any questions, then probably I might take a minute to actually talk the execution approach that I have in my mind.
Yeah, so I think it's a good long-term goal for ONOS to include some kind of authentication system, maybe not as part of the platform, but at least as like a core application that could be enabled or disabled. So the authentication work for us kind of started as part of the core project, but there are lots of other use cases and other projects that are interested in having sort of a more generic authentication framework that they can sort of have an API to understand whether hosts have been authenticated or not. So I think the key thing here is figuring out what's that interface between the authentication system and other applications.
Correct.
How do we inform other applications that hosts have been authenticated? How do they query that state? All that kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to kind of get down to the interface level and understand what's the best way to design that kind of interface. And then going back to your option 1 versus option 2, I'm not sure I quite understand the distinction. It seems to me like actually including elements of both of those approaches may be useful. I definitely think that the authentication system should have some kind of storage, like most of the other systems already have built-in storage using the distributed primitives. So that would be a good place to start. And then the option 2 seems to talk more about the event-based notifications to other applications. But it seems like you'd maybe want a hybrid of both of these approaches. I think having storage is a good idea, but also the notifications to other applications is also a good idea. They don't seem to be mutually exclusive to me.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess the other part of it is, say you wanted to enable authentication with your reactive forwarding. Well, right now, reactive forwarding just whatever packet it gets, it pushes flows and forwards those packets. So it needs to be sort of extended to not enable pushing flows by default. To wait for the authentication to happen and then to push the flows. And that's the same for any other application that's going to be doing forwarding.
Right. So it could be done in 2 ways. So assume that the app is actually getting a packet. So at that time, we could actually go and look into the auth store to see whether this particular MAC address is authenticated. That is on the option 1. Option 2 is that until the forwarding app receives notification, it just keeps ignoring the packaging input. So as soon as it receives the notification, then it starts processing the input. So it can be done 2 ways.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. But again, it seems to me like you would want to support both of those models, both querying the state and also event-based notification.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like in this meeting, right, I just want to give a heads up that what I have in my mind. So probably based on, like, if you all decide that this is the way to go, then probably I could brainstorm more and come up with a much more complete flow. Probably we could take that up in next EST meeting or the next one.
Yeah, that sounds good.
The other thing we should consider is the term authentication is going to be overloaded. You've got authentication of services and applications from the north, and you've got authentication of devices, endpoints, processes, VMs, whatever from the south. And so we may want to create terminology that helps distinguish that for folks that are looking at this from the area. Because AAA, from an application developer's perspective, means securing the connection between their application and ONOS. Yeah. Whereas AAA, from a device perspective, means establishing a connection with the controller or controller system in the core case.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess here we're talking about like network authentication.
Network authentication.
In the legacy world, there's already protocols stations used to authenticate with the network.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's a good point. It's good to be able to distinguish between those.
Yeah, so I think we should draw a line between the user authentication and device authentication.
And the other thing is that our application is called AAA, but it really only does the authentication part of things. So if we were redesigning this or evolving this, we may want to drop the name AAA and just call it authentication system or something like that.
Okay.
Right, there is one. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But there's no accounting as of yet. Yeah. Okay, cool. Does anyone else have any other questions on this? Okay, Viswa, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just have a slide on the approach that I am seeing. Like you might wonder, like I have two use cases and how I may be able to pull it up. So the idea is to form a community within Chennai. I have some enthusiastic, passionate people with me. So they just need basic coaching on ONOS. So with that, they'll be able to ramp up very soon. So I just like to give a heads up that if at all these two things are to get picked up, then probably I'll be having a community here to develop those features and contribute to ONOS.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, this seems similar to the brigade model that we're sort of I guess playing with right now, which I think you're aware of as well.
Yeah, so I am part of the GUI brigade.
Yeah, so I think it's a great idea to sort of grow the community, and if you have developers that are interested in working on this, then yeah, these are good use cases for them to work on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Juno.
Cool. Thank you. Do you have anything else? Okay, cool.
So what should be my next step?
So I think the next step for the Windows side of things would be to determine whether some of the suggestions that we had, either using Cygwin, using native support in Windows 10, or whether something like refactoring a lot of the scripts to a more portable language such as Python would meet your and then I think if we do want to move forward with this proposal, and it's going to involve a significant amount of code changes and script changes, parallel scripts, we really probably want to have a more detailed technical proposal. So if you want to think about that back, that would be good. Regarding the AAA stuff, I think Jono mentioned that having some more specific interfaces, defining what the interfaces between ONOS application, subsystem application to others would be a good place to start. And if you want some guidance on sort of the best practices we've learned so far with the brigade model, feel free to reach out to us or to David or William Quibinger. They're on the community mailing list.
Sure, yeah. Just one small question, like, would you want to opt on the installer approach, or would it be okay to just have the refactor the scripts and use that way?
I think the installer approach is maybe a second step once we have the basic Windows support working. I mean, we don't really even have this for Linux at this point. Yeah, I don't know. For me, that's kind of a nice to have, but not really essential at this point.
All right, got it. Thank you. Yeah, so I will work on these two observation points, and then I would come back with a much meaty proposal. So probably I will get in touch with the community, and I'll get back with a much more detailed technical proposal as you guys suggested. Thank you.
So another one of the standing items that we normally have at these meetings is community shout-out opportunity. So, anyone have any community shout-outs? Okay. David's not here, so we don't have any. One day he's going to watch all these videos and realize that cool. So I guess we still have a little bit of time. Are there any other topics that are up for discussion that you want to talk about?
I'm done. These two proposals I had, so now I got some good input from you. So probably I will work on it and get back.
Okay, well, I think with that, we can probably end a little bit early. Thanks, everybody, for joining the meeting. Thanks, Viswa, again, for presenting. And, we'll see you again next week at the 4 p.m. slot.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. See you.